Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Under Color of Law analysis of President Biden's farewell speech and what it really should focus us upon. So there's been a lot of attention paid to his warning about the dangers of the rise of a tech industrial oligarchy. And I noted in my Blue Sky post, which you can see here, that he even directly referenced the 1961 farewell address of President Eisenhower, who also gave a warning about the rise of something, which was the rise of the military-industrial complex, and what Eisenhower feared would be its outsized influence upon our country. Obviously, he was right about that. And it's kind of amusing because after my posts, I had a number of replies pointing out there's nothing predictive about this, it's already here, which I agree with. Eisenhower's warning may have done very little to stave off the influence, and he had a unique vantage point having been a military man himself. But let's break down a little bit the differences between what Eisenhower saw and why there's an analogy to the kind of concern that Biden is expressing here. So a big difference between the military-industrial complex, which we're extremely used to now, this idea that there's literally trillions of dollars being spent on armaments and the industries that work with them. But Eisenhower was pointing out that prior to World War II and the massive economic engine that the United States created to produce the arms and machinery necessary to win that war, it had been a much smaller scale before then. And he understood that going forward, there's nothing small about that scale. I mean, there's going to be this merger of industry with the military. And there are some differences because as that industry evolved, what we had were some guardrails put on it. And some of those guardrails involved rules about how you get the contracts for these industries, the so-called bidding regulations. And it's some effort to ensure that this massive amount of money that flows out to the industries are done in a way that they're more fair. And it's not just a profit machine for those with the best connections inside the government, or worse, it's not to the benefit of government officials who literally oversee the contracting and get bribed for steering, that's the term when you're talking about these contract awards, for steering the contracts to their friends or people who have benefited them. Even the idea of oversight committees in Congress, examining the military budget, how it's spent, calling people to testify. We can certainly criticize the failures of that system, but there is some kind of system in place. It needs vigilance, needs a lot of improvement, but there is a system. Not so for the tech industrial oligarchy that Biden's warning about. We really don't have those sorts of guardrails in place for it. So let's take a look at that warning. First question is, we talk a lot about oligarchy these days. Let's examine some questions as to whether we really do have an impending oligarchy or we're already living in one. So some definitions of how you define that, put another way, are we really that much like Russia? One way of defining it is this way, which is from a 2014 study, pre-Trump 1, and we can ask ourselves, has much changed in nearly 10 years since this study? We'll put up that link for you. It was a study done at the Cambridge University Press. One of the things they point out is that one of the results of their study was the finding that proposed policy changes with low support among economically elite Americans is adopted in only about 18% of the time. In contrast, a proposed change with high support from the elite wealthy gets adopted about 45% of the time. Also, quote, when a majority of citizens disagrees with economic elites and or with organized interests, they generally lose. Moreover, because of the strong status quo bias built into the U.S. political system, even when fairly large majorities of Americans favor policy change, they generally do not get it. So, in conclusion, that study said, Americans, to be fair, Americans do enjoy many features central to democratic governance. Regular elections, freedom of speech, association, some contested franchise issues, but we believe that if policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claims to being a democratic society are seriously threatened. 2014, that was. Has it gotten better? Probably gotten worse, right? Another part of the definition is when the very wealthy have the ear of the president and influence policy without having to be in the government itself. Here from the Washington Post article about oligarchy, they point out that oligarchs are a subset of the very, very wealthy. Merely being rich doesn't make you an oligarch. An oligarch is someone who influences politics outside the formal system. That's being explained by Professor Brooke Harrington from Dartmouth. Same professor points out another example was the late Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire casino tycoon, who's a Republican megadonor, who worked on U.S.-Israeli relations. She also makes the obvious analogy to Elon Musk, right, who is taking calls with foreign leaders, seems to have attached himself to Trump's hip since the election. And Musk, of course, is the poster child for the tech industrial complex. And he has billions and billions of dollars worth of government contracts. And he will be given an unofficial, translation, unregulated ability to affect those contracts through his Department of Government Efficiency. An acronym seems to have been named to promote a Bitcoin that he likes. That's the difference, or one difference, between the military-industrial complex and the tech-industrial oligarchs. The latter has far less safeguards right now to check its power, especially because with the oligarchs, that power and influence is concentrated in a wealthy individual, and a lone person, like a lone wolf, can move much more quickly and silently than a large company can move. So Musk, as we saw, can inject $250 million into Trump's campaign without having to ask anybody's permission, jump through any hoops, really with very little transparency too, because it's all his. What can be done about this? It takes time to counter these kinds of forces because it didn't happen overnight to begin with. But small actions also count. Mark Cuban has talked about the power that the users in social media actually have, and not unlike other consumer power, you can stop using certain products, using certain platforms, don't attend certain functions, maybe don't watch the inauguration if you're not interested in it, products, boycott them. But most importantly, those kinds of actions require coverage of what's happening. Tree falls in the forest, no sound, no one reports on it, nobody's noticing it's happening. So take a look at where the Washington Post reports, not unexpected, but these tech billionaires paying homage to Trump. The Post reports as he prepares to take office again, like every single tech person is coming to pay homage to them, from Zuckerberg, Bezos, etc., right? They're all coming to that. TikTok CEO will have to be at Trump's inauguration, obviously, because they're trying to get Trump to overturn this ban somehow. We can talk about that at a different time. And these heads have donated millions to Trump's inauguration. Forget the campaign. We're just talking about the inauguration donors. But guess who won't be there? So I was honored to be invited by Sherry Jacobus's podcast today. I was her interviewee, and she told me something I hadn't heard reported widely on. I'd heard little smidgets of it. But Michelle Obama, who did not attend the Carter funeral where she would have sat next to Trump, won't be attending the inauguration. Bit of a break with traditions. Usually the first ladies go with the former presidents. Nancy Pelosi will also skip it. Maybe she can claim it's because she had the hip injury, but usually the Speaker Emeritus is going to be there. And also, importantly, the post-inauguration, the inaugural lunch, Obama, Clinton, and Bush will not attend that lunch. That's another big break in tradition. These small actions matter, but we need attention paid to them because they have symbolic value. So in that long ago farewell speech in 1961, this is Dwight David Eisenhower, son of a farmer raised in Kansas. He's looking back on 50 years of public service. That included the presidency as well as having overseen the D-Day invasion as the Supreme Allied Commander. So from that vantage point, he is literally on the cusp of the 1960s, right? The person coming to replace him who defeated Nixon is John F. Kennedy. He's looking forward from what vantage point he has, and maybe because he had been presiding over this true modern-day war, he had some ideas of the looming challenges that lay ahead with technology. Pretty good for a guy who was born in the 19th century. Like Biden, Eisenhower was leaving after a half century in public service. Eisenhower was calling out the dangers of technology. He understood that new power, and he understood that those who wielded it would be the new power brokers. He didn't know exactly what form it would take, but he'd seen it in a very obvious way, right, with the military technology and how important the technological advances were. He'd spent the bulk of his life as a soldier, so no doubt he carried that perspective of the shortcomings of mere military power and how it has become merged or would become merged with the power of government that he also got to wield. Now, Biden also served a half century in public service. His institution wasn't the military, but the legislature. Certainly very familiar with the power of politics, and with that vantage point, having lost his opportunity to run a second time and seeing the power of the new tech oligarchy really close up, working in a very brutal way in his own poor ratings, in the influences upon the public through Musk and the millions Musk was putting into the Trump campaign, and seeing Kamala Harris lose, he sees, Biden does, what's clearly upon us. And he sees what has upended the guardrails that he has spent much of his life working to implement, negotiate, certainly at times avoid and manipulate. But those are the guardrails that he has been familiar with. It's really this post-World War II age, the structure that was put into place, that is being upended by further technology, the speed, and particularly the emphasis on communication and how it can be controlled, distorted, if you will. And appropriately, Biden spoke of the symbol of the Statue of Liberty, very nice speech, and the idea of how the statue and the torch had been worked on by immigrants and workers. And he used the metaphor of passing it on to us to continue the fight now. Obviously, he and Vice President Harris cannot continue that fight now. But I was very struck by his allusion to Eisenhower, a man who had been a part of bringing the United States through a world war into a post-war period of prosperity, and what Biden's feeling must have been, having seen America through the recovery from the pandemic, and in many ways the recovery from Trump 1, which appeared then to be this terrible threat to democracy that had been remedied or temporarily, put at bay. Obviously now it's returned. That's a heavy torch to pass on to us, but we've already picked it up, all of us. And I found that Eisenhower's old warrior turned statesman statement surprisingly prescient and moving. I took the time to listen to it, and hope that you can too. It's a pretty short speech, like Biden's, but we'll play a part of it here for you to hear as a closing.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So, listening to that, we hear the echoes of what he believed we needed to have to face the oncoming challenges. And those are echoed in Biden closing and saying to us that we need to pick that up. And we do. So take a listen to that. It's worth thinking about. We'll be here with you, taking up that challenge. And thanks again for the replies and comments. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.